terminal of the airport. Live pictures you're seeing right now, thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators essentially shutting down the world's busiest airport yesterday, and the clashes continue today with 100 flights canceled and people basically trapped inside as the protesters clash with the police. Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam, said ongoing instability, chaos, and violence has placed the city on a path of no return. So I want to bring in Carson Yu, who's right there in Hong Kong, who can keep us updated and give us what's happening. Carson, just give us an idea of what's exactly going down right now. We're looking at the pictures.
So right now, it's a little bit calmer than it was maybe 15 minutes ago. The cops are nowhere to be seen. I think they got back in their vans and drove off, but they must be nearby. The protesters are kind of gathering their resources. Protesters are handing out face masks to cover a lot of the protesters want to cover their faces, especially with so many media cameras here. Right now, I'm seeing a protester climbing up onto one of the main, just in the area of the airport by the monitors, and covering CCTV cameras. So they cover it so their faces won't be revealed when things go down later.
Yeah, and can you just give us an idea of where you're actually at in the airport so we can kind of get a idea of where you are?
I'm near the airport entrance with the glass facade between that and just kind of the check-in terminal. I'm right by a mass of protesters that are gathering around. I think they've pinned down another individual that they say is an anti-protester, basically. And they did it earlier to one. The protester told me they found a suspected police amongst the protesters who've been mingling with the protesters, and they have him pinned down in the check-in area.
It's really interesting.
It's a pretty chaotic scene.
Yeah, it looks pretty chaotic. It's definitely completely packed, and it's interesting because, as we said yesterday, when the protesters were in the terminal, everything was calm. So can you just tell us how this escalated?
Well, I think the protesters were emboldened by their operation yesterday. They came in, shut down one of the world's busiest airports. And when there was a rumor that the police were going to come clear it out at 6 p.m., most of them left, leaving behind a kind of a hardcore bunch that were ready to make a stand. But the police never came, and things kind of ended after the last flight landed in Hong Kong. So the protesters dispersed, and today, this afternoon, they gathered here and they didn't leave.
So it's kind of crazy to imagine the idea if you even had a flight, if you were in this airport, because you're essentially not going to be able to leave, correct?
Well, flights were okay up until 4:30 in the afternoon. If you had checked in before 4:30, you could get to your flight, and the flights are still leaving at this point. I think some flights waited for some passengers. But there was a certain point during the night that the protesters were actively barricading passengers from getting to the departure point. Passengers were appealing to the protesters that they had a medical condition or that a family member is sick, that they needed to get on their flight to go home. But the protesters would stand in front of they would barricade the departure point with baggage cards. And they would say, sorry, we're protesting for our home, and if you have issues, talk to the government. So as you can imagine, a lot of protesters were getting very frustrated with some of these protesters, and some passengers tried to rush the departure point, where some made it and some were pushed back by the protesters.
Yeah, and what we're seeing there, we're seeing the live pictures. There has to be tens of thousands of demonstrators right there inside the terminal. Carson, just for people joining, can you just give us an idea, remind us of why the protesters are even there? What is it that they want exactly?
So about 2 months ago, over 1 million Hong Kongers marched against a controversial extradition bill. What this bill would have done, if passed, was it would allow Hong Kong to extradite suspected criminals to mainland China, and this unearthed some very deep-seated fears that Hong Kongers have with Beijing. They don't trust Beijing, and it's gone to this point because the government, while they shelved the bill in mid-June, they didn't withdraw it, and the government hasn't been responding to these protesters. And the protesters are saying, every week for the last 10 weeks, they've been doing something like, what can we do to get your attention? And the government has been stonewalling. They haven't had any measures to kind of broach or mend the bridge or create any off-ramp of any kind to these tensions.